My boss called me safe and support staff while sipping mimosas on a rooftop, oblivious that I held the keys to her destruction. She thought I was surrendering my resignation, but I was actually handing her a demolition order for her entire life. This is where the corporate ladder turns into a slide straight to hell, and you won't want to miss the landing. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I knew, with the distinct clarity of hindsight, that I should have worn a flak jacket instead of a linen blouse when Jenna invited me to that executive brunch. It was a sweltering July afternoon, the kind where the humidity feels like a physical weight, and we were seated at the best table on the rooftop of the Perch, the city's most pretentious open-air bistro. My stomach was already in knots, not from the heat, but from a week of sleepless nights battling a migraine that felt like a railroad spike driven through my left temple. I was physically drained, running on 3 hours of sleep and a diet of ibuprofen and anxiety. I had dragged myself here because Jenna, our illustrious chief operating officer, had marked the invite as mandatory, future planning. By the third round of bottomless mimosas, hers, not mine, I was nursing a lukewarm cucumber water. Jenna leaned across the glass table. She looked like a discount Bond villain, her oversized designer sunglasses sitting crookedly on her nose, hiding eyes that I knew were scanning the room for someone more important than me. She picked a piece of basil from her teeth, flicked it onto the pristine white tablecloth, and purred, "You know what your problem is, Mara. You're too dependable." I blinked, fighting the throb in my head. Dependable. "Exactly," she said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "You're too safe to lead. You're the foundation, not the skyscraper. You'd make a great support system for someone with actual vision. Honestly, I don't see you in the director's chair next quarter. I see you exactly where you are." The word support hit harder than the midday sun, baking the overpriced shrimp skewers between us. It wasn't just a professional critique. It was a fundamental erasure of the last 7 years of my life. 7 years of missed birthdays, canceled vacations, and working until my eyes blurred, all to build the very systems she was now taking credit for. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the ice melting in my glass. I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who just realized the guillotine in the town square wasn't there for decoration. Jenna laughed at her own brilliance, the sound sharp and grating, and clinked her champagne flute against my water glass. "To clarity," she toasted, oblivious to the fact that she had just lit a fuse. "To clarity," I echoed, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. She went back to scrolling on her phone, dismissing me entirely. Behind my polite nods and composed posture, I wasn't listening to her monologue about synergy and fresh blood. I was mentally counting the number of interns I had trained who now had better parking spots than I did. I was tallying the millions of dollars in revenue I had saved this company while she was networking at spas in Sedona. Jenna, the freshly minted COO via marriage to the co-founder, not via merit, had the audacity to call me safe. Safe like a Honda Civic. Safe like unseasoned chicken. Safe like a woman who hadn't worked unpaid overtime for nearly a decade, building the exact operational framework her new title now put her in charge of breaking. She didn't know it yet, but the safe woman across the table was about to become the most dangerous person she had ever met. I reached into my tote bag, past the bottle of Excedrin, and pulled out a single, crisp white envelope. "Actually, Jenna," I said, cutting off her story about her Pilates instructor. "Since we're discussing the future, this seems like the perfect time." I slid the envelope across the table. It moved smoothly over the linen, coming to rest right next to her mimosa. She frowned, looking at it like it was a piece of trash. "What is this?" "My resignation," I said softly. 2 weeks, effective immediately." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had heard all day. Jenna's laugh trailed off into a confused cough. She looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper, as if trying to decode a foreign language. "Wait, what?" she stammered, her sunglasses slipping down her nose. "I'm done? You said 2 weeks. Mara, are you serious?" "As a heart attack," I replied, rising from my chair. My legs felt shaky, but my spine was steel. "Enjoy the shrimp, watch the basil." And with that, I left her blinking in the sunlight, wondering how the help had just walked out mid-toast. I didn't know. Ook back, you never look back when you're lighting a fuse. I walked out of the restaurant and into the humidity of the street, hailing a cab with a trembling hand. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm of fear and exhilaration. I wasn't just leaving a job, I was peeling back the drywall on a termite nest, and I knew exactly what was going to crawl out. The next morning, Thursday, I arrived at the office early. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a warning, a low-frequency buzz that usually induced stress, but today sounded like a countdown. Everyone thought I was winding down. The rumor mill had already churned out a sanitized version of events, that I was taking a break or pursuing other opportunities. Karen from marketing stopped by my cubicle, dropping off a sad-looking succulent in a geometric pot. "I heard you're leaving us," she chirped, her eyes scanning my desk for gossip. "We'll miss your color-coded spreadsheets." "I'll miss you too, Karen," I lied, smiling like a Stepford intern. The VP of strategy, a man who couldn't export a PDF without assistance, poked his head in an hour later. "Hey Mara, bummer you're heading out. Can we circle back later for a quick knowledge transfer? Just want to make sure we have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak." "Of course," I nodded. "I'm just organizing my files now." He gave a thumbs up and vanished. I turned back to my dual monitors. I was organizing files, just not the ones he thought. I was exporting selected folders into a private, encrypted cloud drive labeled Vacation Photos 2018. To the casual observer, or even a lazy IT tech, it looked like gigabytes of personal clutter I was clearing out before my exit. But nothing says peace of mind like 12 gigabytes of financial irregularities, off-book intern contracts, and time-stamped Slack messages. I wasn't stealing. Let me be very clear about that. I was preserving every late-night pitch deck I had ghostwritten for executives who couldn't spell synergy. I was preserving the time-stamped edits on our annual report, the specific edits where Jenna had changed operating loss to strategic investment realignment. Jenna thought she had humiliated me. She thought I was walking away with my tail between my legs, defeated by her brutal honesty. But she had forgotten one crucial thing. She had forgotten that for 7 years, I wasn't just the director of operations. I was the administrator. I had the master passwords. I knew where the digital bodies were buried because I was the one who had been forced to dig the graves. As the progress bar on my screen ticked from 80% to 90%, I saw Jenna strut past the glass wall of my office. She didn't even look at me. She was on her phone, laughing loudly, likely planning the redecoration of my office before my chair was even cold. "Keep laughing," I thought, my finger hovering over the mouse. "You have no idea that I'm not just packing up a box of personal effects. I'm packing a weapon." To understand why this betrayal cut so deep, you have to understand the history. I wasn't just an employee at Aristan, I was its nervous system. I started 7 years ago when the company was just 10 people in a rented loft that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I was 29, hungry, and willing to work harder than anyone else. I was the one who stayed until 2:00 a.m. fixing the server crashes. I was the one who negotiated our first major vendor contracts when we had no credit history. I had sacrificed my 30s for this place. I missed my sister's engagement party because we were launching the Q3 campaign. I ruined a relationship with a perfectly nice dentist because I was answering emails during our anniversary dinner. I poured my soul into Aristan because I believed in the vision. And then came Jenna. Jenna Price. The surname wasn't a coincidence. She was Dylan Price's wife. Dylan was the co-founder, the creative genius, and a genuinely decent man who had a blind spot the size of Texas when it came to his wife. When Jenna joined the team 2 years ago, it was supposed to be a temporary consulting gig. She had a background in lifestyle branding, which apparently meant she knew how to buy Instagram followers and spend company money on aesthetic audits. Within 6 months, she was the VP of brand. 6 months after that, she was named COO. It was a coup, plain and simple. She didn't understand our supply chain. She couldn't read a balance sheet. She once asked me, in a room full of people, if gross margin was the same thing as gross profit, and when I corrected her, she rolled her eyes and told me I was getting bogged down in the weeds. But she was the founder's wife, so she was untouchable. Her rise to power marked a shift in the company culture. Suddenly, budgets for software updates were slashed, but the budget for executive retreats in Napa skyrocketed. We stopped hiring qualified analysts and started hiring brand ambassadors. Beautiful, vapid 20-somethings who spent more time making TikToks in the break room than actually working. Jenna didn't just ignore me, she actively managed me out of the room. She would schedule high-level strategy meetings and forget to invite me. She would take my reports, put her name on the cover, and present them to the board as her own genius ideas. And the worst part, she did it with a smile. She was the master of the backhanded compliment, the queen of passive aggression. She was a polished, veneer-capped shark in a lavender blazer. As I sat there watching the vacation photos, folder hit 100% complete, I thought about Dylan. He had been distant lately, worn down by the failing metrics he couldn't explain. He trusted Jenna. He thought she was saving the company. He had no idea she was gutting it to fund her vanity projects. I looked at my phone. I had a contact saved under Julie's vet. I don't own a cat. Julie is my imaginary pet. The number belonged to Dylan Price's personal cell phone, a number I had saved 3 years ago during a PR crisis when he and I were the only ones left in the trenches. I hadn't used it since. Calling him would be the nuclear option. It would destroy his marriage, shatter the company's leadership, and likely drag me into a legal war zone. I looked through the glass wall again. Jenna was now standing on a desk, literally standing on a desk taking a selfie with 3 of the new brand ambassadors. They were laughing, holding champagne flutes at 10:30 on a Thursday morning. Meanwhile, in accounting, 3 vendor invoices were 30 days overdue because Jenna hadn't gotten around to approving them. The image of her perfectly curated, fraudulent happiness was the final straw. She wasn't just incompetent, she was a parasite. And she had made the fatal mistake of trying to metabolize the host that was keeping her alive. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Julie's vet. I wasn't leaving. I was preparing to fire the first shot in a war she didn't even know had started. I didn't take everything. I wasn't a thief. I was an archivist of disaster. I took only the parts I had built, the parts she had buried, and the parts that proved I wasn't just support. I was the scaffolding holding up a very expensive lie, and without me, gravity was about to reclaim its due. Walking out of that building felt less like a resignation and more like a tactical retreat. The elevator ride down to the lobby was the longest 45 seconds of my life. I stood alone in the mirrored box, staring at my reflection. I didn't look like a woman who had just nuked her career. I looked calm, terrifyingly calm. I pulled out my phone and recorded a short voicemail to myself, not for posterity, but for evidence. 1 mimosa, 1 lie, and 1 deleted report. Timestamp this, 10:42 a.m. See, while Jenna was busy handing me a gift card and a fake compliment upstairs, I had planted something in the system before logging off. It wasn't malware, and it certainly wasn't illegal. I knew the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act better than I knew the lyrics to my favorite song. What I had left behind were 3 confidential files buried deep in the metadata of a project folder Jenna accessed daily. They were labeled like normal reports: Q3 Budget Draft V4 and Executive Comp Review. If opened, they simply logged access times, IP addresses, and captured screen activity for security audit purposes. Legal wouldn't care today, but in about 6 business days, when a board member opened their inbox to a whistleblower packet, they would want timestamps. They would want proof. They would want to know who had been covering up the phantom intern payrolls. Jenna kept swiping under contractor disbursements and those trigger files. Oh, they were going to sing like canaries. I walked out of the glass revolving doors and into the stifling heat of the city. I didn't go home. I went to a quiet park bench 3 blocks away, sat down, and made the first call. I called Claire. Claire Brenner was my former college roommate, a karaoke assassin who could hit a high C after 3 tequilas, and now, a divorce attorney who wore red nail polish like war paint and billed in 6-minute increments. The last time we spoke, she had just won a case where the mistress got the dog, but the wife got the Porsche and the vacation home in Aspen. She picked up on the second ring. Well, her voice crackled through the speaker, rich with amusement. If it isn't the queen of lost causes, please tell me you're not calling to ask if you should text your ex. I have a situation, I said, my voice dropping an octave. It involves marriage, misconduct, and mimosas. Claire didn't even pause. The playfulness vanished from her tone, replaced by the sharp, metallic edge of a blade being drawn. Tell me everything, and don't skip the footnotes. I spent the next 20 minutes outlining the architecture of the collapse. I told her about the consulting fees paid to companies that didn't exist. I told her about the lifestyle audits. I told her about the way Jenna treated Dylan, like a confused golden retriever she kept on a short leash while she spent his money. I need you to be ready, I said. I'm going to bring the house down, but I need someone to catch the debris. Consider the net deployed, Claire said. You get the documents, I'll sharpen the knives. After hanging up with Claire, I stared at the phone screen. Now came the hard part, the part that made my stomach turn. I scrolled to Julie's vet. My thumb hovered over the name. Dylan Price was a good man. He was kind, creative, and hopelessly in love with the idea of who his wife pretended to be. Hurting him was the only part of this plan that kept me up at night, but leaving him in the dark while she drained his legacy dry, that would be the greater betrayal. I pressed call. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. I held my breath. I knew he wouldn't have my number saved. I hadn't called him in years. Hello. His voice sounded tired, not just sleepy, but soul-weary. The voice of a man who spends his days putting out fires he didn't start. Dylan, I said, it's Mara. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that stretched across the cellular network. Mara, he said, and I could hear the confusion. Is everything okay? Jenna said she said you resigned this morning. Something about needing a break. I didn't resign because I needed a break, Dylan, I said, keeping my voice steady. I resigned because I couldn't be the one to tell you what's happening while I was still on the payroll. What are you talking about? I need you to meet me, I said, not at the office, somewhere quiet, somewhere she doesn't go. Mara, I have a board prep meeting in an hour. Skip it, I cut in. Trust me, you're going to want to see this before the board does. Another silence, then the sound of a chair scraping back. The coffee shop on 4th and Main, he said, 20 minutes. The coffee shop was one of those hipster places with exposed brick walls and baristas who intentionally spelled your name wrong on the cup to assert dominance. It was half empty, the air smelling of roasted beans and ozone. I sat in the back corner, my back to the wall. On the table in front of me sat a manila folder. It wasn't thick, maybe 20 pages, but it was dense. I called it the Jenna Ledger. Dylan walked in 5 minutes late. He looked like he hadn't slept since Easter. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of expensive eye cream could fix. He scanned the room, spotted me, and walked over with a hesitant, confused expression. Mara, he said, sliding into the metal chair opposite me. I don't understand. Jenna said you left because you were burned out. She said you threw a tantrum at brunch. She would say that, I said, sipping my peppermint tea. Did she also tell you why she fired the last 3 finance directors? He frowned. They weren't a culture fit, that's what she said. Dylan, I said gently. They were fired because they asked questions. I didn't ask questions, I just took screenshots. I slid the folder across the scratched wooden table. It moved with a heavy thud that seemed too loud for the room. What is this? He asked, staring at it like it might bite him. This, I said, is where the money went. He opened the folder. The first page was a summary sheet I had created, a simple, color-coded graph showing the discrepancy between the marketing budget and the actual vendor payouts. I don't get it, he muttered, his eyes scanning the lines. Marketing spend is up 40%, I know that. We're in a growth phase. Turn the page, I said. He flipped the page. It was a list of invoices from a vendor called Lumina Creative LLC. Lumina Creative, he read. Yeah, they handle our social strategy. Jenna loves them. Look at the address for Lumina Creative, I instructed. He squinted at the paper. 1402 Oakwood Drive? Wait. He stopped. He looked up at me, his face draining of color. That's her yoga instructor's condo complex. I picked her up from there last week. Lumina Creative is a shell, Dylan, I said, my voice low. There is no agency. There are no strategists. It's a pass-through entity. We pay Lumina $15,000 a month for consulting, and Lumina pays Jenna's personal credit card bill. No, he whispered. No, she wouldn't. She has her own money. She had her own money, I corrected. Gambling debts in Vegas don't pay themselves. He flipped to the next section, the intern program. We have 12 interns on the payroll, I said. Have you ever met them? I mean, I see young people in the break room. Those are the actual interns, I said. The ones from the local university who work for Course C. Read it, the 12 on the payroll, they don't exist. They're direct deposit routing numbers. They all trace back to a single account in the Cayman Islands. An account opened in your name, Dylan, without your signature. He dropped the folder. His hands were shaking. He looked like a man who had just been told his house was built on a sinkhole. Why, he choked out, why are you showing me this now? Because I don't need revenge, I said, leaning in. I need leverage, and right now you need a life raft. If the board finds this before you do, you're compliant, you're the co-founder. You sign the checks. If you don't get ahead of this, you're going to prison for her crimes. He stared at me, the denial warring with the data. He wanted to defend her. I could see it in his eyes, the instinct to protect the woman he married. But the numbers were cold, hard, and irrefutable. I'm going to make a call, he said, his voice trembling. I need to ask her. Don't, I said sharply. If you confront her now, she'll delete everything. She'll wipe the servers. She'll burn the paper trail and blame it on an IT glitch. You need to secure the evidence first. How? He asked, looking helpless. You still trust Claire? I asked. He nodded slowly. She handled my brother's estate. She's intense. She's your attorney now, I said. Call her, she's waiting. While Dylan sat in that coffee shop, his world crumbling into dust, back at Aristan HQ, the haunting had begun. Jenna was sitting in her glass-walled office, trying to open the executive comp review folder to check her bonus structure. She double-clicked the file. Nothing happened. She clicked again, the screen flickered. A small dialog box appeared, error 404, file corrupted, access logged. What the hell, she muttered, jamming her finger against the mouse. She tried to open her calendar. It wouldn't sync. Her priority threads weren't populating. A deck she'd emailed to the board 10 minutes ago bounced back with a notification. Sender verification failed. It was subtle enough to chalk up to technical incompetence. Our IT department was notoriously underfunded, thanks to her, but it was specific enough to feel personal. She picked up her desk phone to call the help desk. It feels like the system is turning on me, she hissed into the receiver. She was right, it was. I hadn't hacked anything. I didn't need to. All I did was activate a little network I'd built over the years. Assistants, developers, junior admins, people who owed me favors, or people who just hated Jenna enough to press the wrong button when asked. Someone had swapped out her draft folder with a decoy. Someone had accidentally unsynced her Slack history. Someone had flagged her Zoom account as a phishing risk. Jenna thought she was being targeted by ghosts in the machine. She had no idea the ghosts had names, employee ID numbers, and a group chat called The Resistance. The Monday after I left felt like the heavy, pressurized silence before a tornado touches down. I was sitting in my apartment, watching the rain streak the windows, my laptop open to a secure dashboard Claire had set up. The first domino fell at 9:11 a.m. HR flagged a new submission in their anonymous reporting portal. It wasn't a vague complaint about toxic culture. It was a surgical strike. Title: COO Misconduct Urgent. Attached were 7 PDFs, 1 zip file, and a screen recording. The recording was the piece de resistance. It was a screen capture triggered when Jenna had opened that decoy folder on Thursday. The camera on her laptop had activated standard security protocol for unauthorized access attempts on restricted files, and it had recorded her voice perfectly. In the video, Jenna was on the phone. "Don't forward that to finance," she snapped. "They'll just ask questions. Just route it through the marketing discretionary fund. No one looks at that." It was a smoking gun, wrapped in 4K resolution. HR forwarded it to the board. The subject line: "Review immediately." Jenna, meanwhile, was spiraling. She stormed into the office wearing white, actual white, head to toe, like some sort of purity cosplay intended to deflect suspicion. She told the front desk she was ready to refocus now that the negative energy, me, was gone. She had no clue she was already in freefall. She didn't notice that the legal team was CCing each other more than usual. She didn't notice that the head of compliance had skipped the 10:00 a.m. stand-up meeting. She didn't even flinch when her email permissions started acting weird again. But she definitely noticed when Dylan walked through the front door. He didn't have his security badge. He didn't have a smile. He had a stiff jaw and a manila envelope in his hand. He walked straight past the reception desk, ignored the cheerful "Good morning, Mr. Price" from the admin, and entered the HR director's office without knocking. Jenna saw him from her glass tower. She stood up, frowning, and tapped on the glass. He didn't look up. Inside the HR office, Dylan placed the envelope on the desk. "I just wanted to deliver this myself," he said to the HR director, his voice devoid of emotion. "You'll want to look into it thoroughly." Inside that envelope was a certified statement from his new legal representation, Brenner and Associates. It was a formal notice of investigation into financial mismanagement, supported by internal documents. And clipped to the back, almost as an afterthought, was a petition for legal separation. Dylan left as quietly as he came. He didn't go to Jenna's office. He didn't scream. He just walked out, got into his car, and drove to Claire's office. Jenna tried to act calm. She messaged Dylan, "Saw you stopped by, lunch." No reply. She messaged him again, "Honey." The message failed to deliver. User not found. That afternoon, the rot was fully exposed. Dylan and Claire were sitting in a conference room on the other side of town, staring at a projector screen. I was dialed in via secure video link. "It's worse than we thought," Claire said, pointing to a spreadsheet. She wasn't just skimming, she was laundering. We had found the legacy access logs. Jenna had been using the credentials of former employees, people she had fired years ago, to approve her own expenses. She would log in as Project Manager Mike, submit an invoice for $5,000, log out, log in as Jenna Price, and approve it. "She thought she was being clever," I said from the screen. "She thought because the employees were gone, the accounts were dead. She didn't know it never deletes executive accounts, they just archive them." Dylan sat with his head in his hands. "I defended her," he whispered. When the board asked why costs were up, I told them it was necessary. I lied for her without even knowing it. You were the first victim, Dylan, Claire said, her voice unusually soft. But you're also the only witness who matters. Back at the office, Jenna's world was shrinking. At 3:00 p.m., she tried to access the company credit card portal to book a flight to Miami. Account frozen. She tried the backup card. Account suspended, contact administrator. She stormed out of her office, her heels clicking like gunshots on the tile floor. Why is my card declined? She shouted at her assistant, poor Marcy. Marcy looked like she wanted to melt into the carpet. I don't know, Jenna. Accounting said all executive cards are under review. Review? By who? By the audit committee, Marcy whispered. We don't have an audit committee, Jenna yelled. We do now, said a voice from the doorway. Jenna spun around. Standing there was the chairman of the board. He was a man who rarely visited the office, usually preferring to count his money from a golf course in Florida. But today, he was here. And he wasn't smiling. Jenna, he said, his voice cold enough to freeze nitrogen. We need to talk, in the boardroom, now. Jenna looked at him, then at Marcy, then at the silent office where every single employee had stopped typing to watch. For the first time, the confidence cracked. The mask slipped. I have a call, she stammered. Cancel it, the chairman said. The showdown didn't happen in the quiet, soundproofed sanctity of the boardroom. That would have been too dignified for Jenna, and frankly, too private for the magnitude of her deception. No, Jenna, true to her nature, demanded an audience. Believing she could spin the narrative before the board's witch hunt gained traction, Jenna had exercised her remaining executive authority to call an emergency, all-hands, town hall meeting in the main atrium. Her strategy was transparent. Paint herself as the victim of a corporate coup, rally the employees, and force the board to back down or risk a public relations mutiny. It was 4:00 p.m. on Tuesday. The atrium was packed. 300 employees stood shoulder to shoulder, murmuring nervously. I wasn't among them, not yet. I was waiting in the wings, standing in the service corridor with Dylan, Claire, and the chairman of the board, watching the live stream on a tablet. Jenna stood on the raised platform, bathed in the warm glow of the architectural lighting she had spent $50,000 installing last month. She looked impeccable, though a keen eye could see the tremor in her hands as she gripped the microphone. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Jenna's voice boomed, echoed by the atrium's acoustics. There have been rumors circulating. Ugly rumors. Rumors started by disgruntled former employees who couldn't handle the pace of our innovation. She paused for effect, looking out over the crowd with a practiced expression of pained nobility. I want you to know that I am being targeted, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Targeted because I dared to disrupt the status quo, because I refused to accept mediocrity. And sadly, my husband. She choked. Back a fake tear. My husband has been manipulated by these same saboteurs. In the corridor, Dylan stiffened. His jaw clenched so hard I thought a tooth might crack. She's good, Claire whispered, checking her watch. But we're better, ready. The chairman nodded. Let's go. Back on stage, Jenna was winding up for her big finish. We must stand together against these lies, we must. The double doors at the side of the atrium swung open with a heavy, hydraulic hiss. The sound cut through Jenna's speech, and 300 heads turned in unison. We walked in. The chairman led the phalanx, followed by Dylan, then Claire, and finally me. The murmur in the room turned into a roar of whispers. Is that Mara? I thought she quit. Who is the woman in the red suit? That's the chairman. Jenna froze. Her mouth was slightly open, the microphone drooping in her hand. For a split second, she looked like a deer in headlights if the deer was wearing a $3,000 suit. Then, the mask slammed back into place. This is a private company meeting, Jenna barked into the mic, though her voice shrilled. Security, please escort these. Sit down, Jenna, the chairman said. He didn't have a microphone, but his voice, the baritone rumble of a man who had crushed unions in the 80s, carried all the way to the back row. "Excuse me," Jenna scoffed, trying to regain control of the crowd. "You can't just barge in here and—" "I said sit down," the chairman repeated, stepping onto the platform. He didn't look at her, he looked at the AV technician at the control desk. "Cut her mic. Switch the main screen to input B." The feedback whine died instantly as Jenna's microphone went dead. She tapped it frantically, then glared at the tech kid, who shrank behind his monitor. "What is the meaning of this?" she shouted, her unamplified voice sounding thin and desperate in the large space. "The meaning," Dylan said, stepping up beside the chairman, "is that we're done lying, Jenna." Jenna turned to her husband, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Dylan, you're doing this here, in front of them." "You wanted an audience," I said, stepping out from behind Dylan. Jenna's gaze snapped to me. The hatred in her eyes was so pure, so visceral, it almost had a physical temperature. "You," she hissed. "I should have known. The secretary returns." "Director of operations," I corrected calmly, "and I brought the minutes." I nodded to the AV tech. The massive projection screen behind Jenna, which had been displaying the company logo, flickered and changed. It wasn't a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are boring, they don't play well to a crowd. It was the Jenna ledger visualized. A timeline appeared on the 20-foot screen. It showed money leaving the company accounts and flowing into Lumina Creative, and from there, directly into payments for a Range Rover, a luxury condo rental, and, most damning of all, a wire transfer to a casino in Las Vegas. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the atrium. "This is fake," Jenna screamed, stepping in front of the screen as if she could block the truth with her body. "She doctored these. She's a bitter, fired employee trying to frame me." "We have the bank records, Jenna," Claire spoke up, her voice projecting clearly. "Subpoenaed this morning, matched to the penny." "Circumstantial," Jenna yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You have no proof I authorized any of this. My signature isn't on those checks." "No," I said, walking slowly toward the edge of the stage. "Your signature isn't, but your voice is." I signaled the tech again. The video from Thursday played. The audio was crisp, amplified by the atrium speakers. Jenna's voice, unmistakably arrogant, filled the room. "Don't forward that to finance. They'll just ask questions. Just route it through the marketing discretionary fund. No one looks at that." Jenna went pale, translucent pale. She looked at the screen, where her own face was captured in high definition, authorizing fraud. Then the coup de grace. The screen changed to a list of names, the interns. "These 12 people," I said, addressing the room, not her. "You've never seen them, you've never worked with them. But for the last 2 years, they have been paid higher salaries than our senior engineers." I pointed to the screen. "Sarah Jenkins, Mark Yulin, David Ross, these aren't interns, they are aliases, and the bank accounts they link to." The screen shifted to show a copy of a bank account formation document. "They belong to Jenna Price," I finished. The silence in the atrium was absolute. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system. You could hear the blood rushing in your own ears. Jenna looked at the crowd. 300 pairs of eyes stared back at her, not with admiration, not with fear, but with disgust. She looked at the board, stone-faced. She looked at Dylan. Dylan reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a gun or a phone. He pulled out a thick envelope. He walked over to her, closing the distance between husband and wife, between founder and fraud. "Dylan," she whispered, her voice trembling, finally realizing the game was over. "Honey, please, we can talk about this at home." "I'm not going home, Jenna," he said softly, "and neither are you." He placed the envelope in her hand. "You're fired, effective immediately, and you've been served." Jenna looked down at the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears that might have even been real this time. "But I made you relevant." "No," Dylan said, stepping back to stand beside me. "You made us a liability." The chairman stepped to the microphone. "Security, please escort Ms. Price from the building. She is not to touch any company property. She is not to speak to any staff." Two security guards, men Jenna had ignored for 2 years, stepped onto the stage. They weren't rough, but they were firm. One took her left arm, the other her right. "Get your hands off me," she shrieked, a final, jagged burst of entitlement. "Do you know who I am? I am the COO." "Not anymore," I said. As they dragged her off the stage, her heels scraping against the floor she thought she owned, she locked eyes with me one last time. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked terrified. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stood there, flanked by the people she had tried to destroy, and watched her disappear through the double doors. The safe option had just detonated the building. The days following the town hall were a blur of legal motions and forensic accounting. The fall of Jenna Price wasn't just a corporate scandal, it was a local news event. The Lumina Ledger, as the press dubbed it, became a case study in executive hubris. Jenna didn't just lose her job, she lost everything. The forensic audit revealed the extent of the damage was nearly $3 million over 2 years. Because the amounts crossed state lines and involved wire fraud, federal prosecutors got involved. The last I heard, Jenna was out on bail, living in her sister's guest room because her assets, including the condo and the Range Rover, had been frozen by the court. The discount bond villain was now facing a very real possibility of 10 to 15 years in a federal facility, where the only stripes she'd be wearing wouldn't be designer. Dylan took a leave of absence to heal. He wasn't unscathed, he had to answer to the board for his lack of oversight, but because he had brought the evidence forward himself, technically, because I had given it to him, he was spared the legal rod. He spent his days liquidating the brand assets Jenna had bought and trying to rebuild trust with the staff. As for me, I didn't go back to Aristan. They offered, of course. The chairman took me to lunch at the very same rooftop restaurant where Jenna had fired me. He offered me the COO role. He offered me a salary that made my eyes water. He told me the company needed my steady hand. I drank my cucumber water, looked at the view, and politely declined. "I built the foundation," I told him, "but I don't want to live in the house anymore." I realized that staying would mean always being the woman who took down the boss. I would be the ghost of the scandal. I needed fresh air. 2 months later, I was sitting in a new office. It was smaller, yes. The furniture wasn't imported Italian leather, but the name on the door was mine, Myra Raines, Strategic Operations Consulting. I had taken the payout from a whistleblower reward program, a little-known corporate clause Claire had found for me, and started my own firm. My first client, a competitor of Aristan who valued safety and dependability above all else. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Dylan knocked on my door. He looked better. The dark circles were gone, and he was wearing a shirt that looked like he'd ironed it himself. "Nice place," he said, looking around. "It's quiet," I smiled. "I like quiet." He sat down, fiddling with a coffee cup he'd brought in. "I just wanted to say thank you. Again, the board. They're finally listening. We're back in the black for the first time in 2 years." "I saw the quarterly report," I said. "Good numbers, real numbers." He nodded. "We miss you, you know. The place runs, but it doesn't hum." "It will," I assured him. "You have good people, Dylan. You just need to stop looking for rock stars and start appreciating the roadies." He laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard in years. Lesson learned. Expensive lesson, but learned. He stood up to leave, pausing at the door. "You know, she called me yesterday, Jenna." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "She wanted me to know that she forgives me," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "She said she hopes I find someone who challenges me as much as she did." She really is the main character of her own reality show, isn't she? "Until the end," he agreed, "but I canceled her subscription." We said our goodbyes, and I watched him walk down the hall. I felt a profound sense of lightness. The anger that had fueled me, the petty revenge engine I had joked about, had run out of gas. And that was okay. I didn't need it anymore. I turned back to my desk. My calendar was color-coded. My inbox was organized. My coffee was hot. Jenna had called me safe like it was an insult. She thought safety meant weakness. She thought being dependable meant being static. She was wrong. Safety is what you build before the storm hits. Dependability is the anchor that holds when the hurricane tries to drag you out to sea. I wasn't the boring support beam she thought I was. I was the load-bearing wall. And when you remove the load-bearing wall, the roof comes down on your head. I opened a new spreadsheet, typed project, new beginnings in cell A1, and smiled. It was time to build something new.